Hello, once again, audience. So the last time I saw you, we did pre-colonial Africa in terms of Scramble for Africa, and we spoke about how Africa looked like before Europeans arrived. We explained what was colonialism and how it kind of affected Africa, not just Africa, but many other countries in the world. And we spoke about how in the 1800s, Africa was only known by coastal cities and things like that, and they weren't really concerned with what was happening in the interior. But then, after the Industrial Revolution and things like that, some Europeans wanted more parts of Africa. So today we're going to do the Berlin Conference, which is basically where Europeans decide that instead of fighting amongst themselves, they are going to have a meeting. And at that meeting, they're going to basically take Africa like a piece of cake and cut it up and say, here's a piece for you, here's a piece for you, here's a piece for you. And right, so this was done at a place called the Berlin Conference, where Africa was divided among the European powers. It basically lasted from 1884 to 1885. And there were seven main European powers involved. Uh, United States was excluded, Russia was excluded. So it was other European countries that were involved there. So this is a quote from Otto von Bismarck, who was the German chancellor at the time and the guy that was kind of running this conference. He says, "Your map of Africa is really quite nice, but my map of Africa lies in Europe. Here is Russia and here is France, and we're in the middle. That's my map of Africa." So basically, marking out parts of Africa that's going to be used by whichever European power. So in the 1800s, much of Africa was unknown to Europe. We discussed this before. We said they were mainly involved with the coast and trading at the coast with slaves, gold, salt, and things like that. But a little bit later in the century, they discovered that Africa had a lot of valuable resources like gold, diamond, rubber, copper, oil, gas, etc., etc., etc. So they saw Africa as a place where they could make money. And in order to do that, they would have to take over Africa. So Africa would become not only a place for them to get raw materials, but also a new market in which they can sell all of their goods. They wanted the land for land, profit, and power, but they didn't want to fight each other for it. So Europeans have a long history of fighting with each other. There was even wars that lasted one day. And there's one, actually, I should add this to the Fun Fact Friday, but there was one war where they left with like 1,000 people and then they returned with 1,001 because one guy joined the other time, the other team. But yeah, so Europeans have a long history of war, and they didn't want to fight over Africa because that could have turned into a very, very bloody war. So instead, they had this Berlin Conference. So it was a big meeting that was held in Berlin, which is in Germany, with seven different European powers to discuss how Africa would be divided amongst them. That was led by Otto von Bismarck, who we discussed earlier with his glorious moustache. And the European countries basically used this conference to divide Africa without causing conflict between the different groups. And how they decided this was that the more powerful your army was, your military and things like that, you will get a bigger part of Africa. And the more economically powerful your country was, etc., etc., etc. So if you were not really that strong, you didn't get that much of a big area of Africa that you were allowed to control. So, what is interesting about the Berlin Conference is that no African leaders were invited. Now, just imagine this. You've got a house, and somebody else walks into your house, and as they're walking in, they're like, "Oh, this would be nice for my mom. That would be nice for my brother. That would be nice for my sister." And you're like, "Hey, hey, dude, what are you doing? This is my house." But you're not even invited to this division of Africa, which means that you have no say, you have no power in terms of, hey, you can't just take that land, or I don't want the land to be divided like that. You just did not have a voice. So this is the meeting that started the Scramble for Africa, where Europe basically drew borders. So sometimes if you look at a map of Africa, you'll see that some of the lines are very, very straight because it was drawn literally with a ruler. They would say, this part here belongs to this person, this part here belongs to this person. And then other borders were created by natural barriers like rivers, mountains, etc., etc., etc. So these borders cut across 170 ethnic tribes. So that means there's different groups and different families, and what they would do is they would draw a line in between the family. And then half of the family is here and the other half of the family is here. Now suddenly you are Namibian and you are Angolan, just suddenly because of these borders that were drawn up. It also did the opposite, where it would put rival groups together. So you and your enemy are living in different areas, but now they've put you in the same area. And they said, this is now the Congo, and everyone that lives in the Congo is Congolese. But meanwhile, you were two separate groups. And now, because that area has been earmarked, now you are being forced to be the same nationality. Which did cause massive, massive problems, particularly in places like Rwanda. In the year I was born, actually, there was a massive genocide in Rwanda where I think about, ooh, I don't want to say off the top of my head because I can't remember, but maybe about 800,000 people were killed just because they belonged to a different tribe than another group of people. So it caused massive, massive issues, splitting people up, putting enemies together, just drawing random arbitrary borders throughout Africa. These changes caused many problems that can still be seen today. And by the end of colonization, Africa had 46 different countries. So this is a map of Africa before and after colonization. I just want you to take note of the following. So you'll see most of the areas that are known to Europeans are all on the coast. There's us, hey us, and then more up here, right? And then here you can see suddenly the whole of Africa is basically taken up, and those borders have changed a lot. You'll see that this whole area now is under British control. The area up here is French. And that's why you'll see even today, many people in these North African countries will speak French, whereas people towards the bottom here will speak English. And then this here was German, and they still teach German in schools in Namibia, by the way. That's interesting to know. All right, so what you can do just as a assessment for yourself is you can identify and explain one political cause of a change that identified in the two maps. So what happened that the map suddenly looks like this? It goes from this to this. Name and explain. Identify, you must say what happened, and explain, you kind of go into detail. Right. And then B, identify and explain one ideological factor. So it's ideas different from part A that contributed to a change identified in the two maps. So initially we said Europeans are on the coast. So now why all of a sudden do they want the whole of Africa? What changed in the way that they were thinking? And then here, lastly, identify and explain a reason why the colonial claims outlined in the map on the right did not occur during the time period between 1450 and 1750. So this is a bit difficult to answer. It requires you to know a little bit about what was happening specifically in the 1800s that led to this change. And we did it in term one, hint, hint. All right, so that is it for the Berlin conference. The next time I see you, we'll speak about patterns of colonization, which is very, very short. Actually, maybe I'll just include it because we're already there anyway. So let's move along. Right, so we're going to skip activity one. This is an activity I did with my students. You don't have to do them. Patterns of colonization. Which countries colonized which parts of Africa? So if you have a look here, you can see a map of, or a pie chart of how Africa was divided. France took 36% of Africa, which was basically in the north, the west, and the central Africa. Britain took 32% South and East Africa, and the other European powers, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Germany, shared the other 29%, while independent nations were Ethiopia and Liberia. I've got a video of that on Fun Fact Friday, which you can see why they were not colonized in particular. So what's the key points here? France dominated Northwest and Central Africa. Britain controlled Southern and Eastern Africa, and other Europeans held scattered territory. So you can actually see it outlined here. What teachers really like to do with this particular unit is they like to give you this map as a source, and then they'll usually ask you like who were the 7 colonizing powers, or they would ask who had the most land, who had the least land, which places were independent. So those are the type of questions that you can expect on this type of work. All right, I think that's it. So the next time I see you, we'll do causes of colonization, and I hope you have a lovely day further. See you next time. Bye.